Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now focusing on the Japanese-Egyptian relations, the bilateral relations. This is in light of the President's meeting with the Japanese Foreign Minister. We're joined over the phone by Dr Mohammed Fahmy, the Professor of Political Science at the American University in Cairo. Dr Fahmy, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Dr Fahmy, first of all, how important is it for the President Sisi to meet with the Japanese Foreign Minister, and how significant politically is it now in such a critical time taking place in the Asian continent?
Well, yes, first of all, thank you for having me. This is a very important country, Japan, of course. After World War II, Japan has become one of the biggest industrialized countries in the world, a developed economy, and a major source of investment and economic and industrial cooperation all over the world. So at this juncture, where Egypt is trying to achieve more development in the various sectors, it's very important to coordinate closely and work closely with a country like Japan. Japan has a long history in Egypt of mutual cooperation and development, especially in the projects and in the area of social and economic development. You know, historically with the Suez Canal, since the reopening of the Suez Canal after the 1973 war, great projects were done there with the support of Japan. The peace bridge there, which between the two sides of the canal, is an example of this token of friendship and cooperation. Of course, we have also cultural projects like the Opera House in downtown Cairo that was also built with the support of Japan. And most recently, of course, we have the museum, which I think your report mentioned clearly, is the current mega project on which both countries are collaborating. So it's a great history of mutual, I think, understanding and cooperation. So it's definitely very important to keep these ties as close and as solid as possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about politically? We're going to get into the economic and cultural relations a little bit later, but what about politically? How influential is Japan in the political international field? How can we make use of their international weight, and what sort of benefit can we be for Japan?
Well, economic and political ties are closely connected with each other, and
yes,
it's really very difficult to disentangle one from the other. The economic role that Japan plays in the world, or has been playing in the world since the post-war era, has in many ways also defined its political landscape in the way of Japan being now considered as mostly as a broker state, as a country that doesn't really, especially after the major defeat in World War II. Ever since then, the basis of Japanese foreign policy were established on the notion of non-interference in the affairs of other countries. So you'll find that to date, for instance, the Japanese army or the military institution in Japan is still very small, limited, doesn't have that much of a say in international affairs, doesn't really get involved in missions, for instance, overseas. Japan is always, since its very horrific experience in the World War, has taken the stance of not interfering in the affairs of other countries, but only on the basis of economic and social ties and collaboration. And so we find here a great sense, I think, of overlap between the interests of both countries. Egypt has more than once stated its willingness and its openness for countries that are interested in doing the joint work in developmental cooperation and industrial development. So the basis, I think the foundations of this relationship between the two countries are quite strong, and there's a lot of room to be exploited in that regard. Again, since I think unlike most global powers today, Japan is one of the least, I would say, countries that are keen on involving themselves in political or in internal affairs in other countries. Of course, as a major power, Japan does have its interests, but again, these interests are mostly linked to industrial and economic relations.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think that Egypt really constitutes a really fertile and potential soil for investments for Japan? I mean, we have so many developmental projects and cooperation with Japan's neighbors. Do you think Japan also wants to increase its share of investments in Egypt and maybe through Egypt to the African continent?
Of course. I mean, Egypt is a major hub in the Middle East and North Africa. It's also within very close proximity to other areas in the world, like Southern Europe, like the rest of the African continent. So there's a lot of room here to be exploited, and that is still there for exploitation, I would say, for further development and cooperation. Egypt-Japan ties are sound economically, but they can definitely get better. There's a lot of room for more foreign direct investment from major Japanese companies, for more factories to be opened here in Egypt to export, again, act as an economic hub for more trade within the region and also with the African continent, and again, through the Suez Canal, for instance, which is a major trade route. I mean, currently Egypt is undergone one of the biggest developmental projects with a new, industrial zone that's been established in the Suez Canal area. So here there is another potential for major investments coming not only from the usual suspects that you would think in this case, like the Arab neighbors or maybe the multinational corporations from Europe, but also from countries like Japan, which is again has a great experience in the field of international trade and development, and also has strong and old ties in the region of the Suez Canal. So this is one example. But of course, I think more investments can be encouraged, and I think in light of the post-COVID phase, where many countries, especially developing countries, will be vying for more investment from major global powers, I think Japan is definitely a great candidate for that role, and Egypt hopefully will be able to capitalize.
Yes. Well, Dr. Fahmy, a lot of observers and political analysts are saying, as you've mentioned, Japan is not really one of those countries involved in a lot of political turmoils or crises around the world, which makes it a little bit safer and maybe even more stable of an environment to economically have some sort of cooperation with. How true is such a comment?
Well, I think that's very true. I think it's very accurate to say that. I mean, historically, if we look at the trajectory of Japanese relationships with its neighbors since 1945 and the world, you'll find that there is very little in terms of interference or intervention in foreign affairs. Most of the files that are still outstanding today in Japan's relations with its neighbors and the rest of the world are one way or another linked to the events of World War and what was before, like the lingering frictions between it and China, issues of sovereignty over certain islands with Russia, since again the legacy of the Soviet Union. All of these issues have been lingering since the end of the war, but really ever since then, Japan has not been interested that much in interfering with political affairs, and mostly concentrated on economic and cultural ties with other countries. And again, given the historic also role of a country like Egypt and its weight in the region, and its again another ancient civilization also like the Japanese one, there is a great deal of respect and interest also in Japan itself for the role that Egypt can play, and with a stronger state institutions and more focus and more, I would say, encouragement for investments from Japan. I think Egypt, again, is very well poised to play such a role.
Sir, now, there are a lot of developments taking place around the world, and really mainly under the spotlight, Afghanistan. Things have been changing quite rapidly. How far do you think the I mean, maybe it's a bit of, maybe there are early days to try and have some sort of a judgment or assessment. But how much do you think what's happening in Afghanistan is changing the political roadmap and the balance of power in the international community and maybe in Asia?
I mean, just like you said, it's still very early days. I think the events that happened in Afghanistan and its impact will unfold more clearly in the coming days. I mean, there's no doubt that what happened, what has been happening, what will happen in the coming days will have a major effect on global relations, not only in Asia, but also in the wider international community. I mean, first and foremost, it's a country that's bordered by other major regional and global powers. You have India, you have Pakistan, you have China, Russia, all in the very close proximity from Afghanistan, and also you have Islamic fundamentalism and the potential of Afghanistan being again a hub for extremist ideologies, which is a major risk for international peace and security. So you have a lot of files here that will definitely be erupting in the coming weeks and months. So that's an issue, of course, and a reason for concern. I think a country like Japan, also Egypt, will be concerned about this being a potential source of instability and of insecurity in the Asian continent and the wider global community. And it will be one of the lingering, I think, pockets of conflict that will keep, that will likely stay for a protracted time frame. So it's definitely in the best interest of both countries today to try and, mitigate that will be coming from this part of the world. Try as much as possible to limit the possibility of this, pocket of potential source of instability to expand beyond the borders of Afghanistan. I think that this will be the major challenge that most countries that are keen on international peace and stability will definitely try and work on in the coming period.
Yes. Dr. Mohammed Fahmy, the Professor of Political Science at the American University in Cairo, thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, definitely Asia is one of the main places and continents now under the spotlight, and Japan has been taking a center stage for quite some time for the Olympics, and Egypt winning really 6 medals, the heroics of the Egyptian youth, the Egyptian athletes. Also, the president met with the Japanese foreign minister. A lot of developments taking place between Egypt and Japan. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. Before we go, let's check out this report regarding the growing Egyptian-Japanese economic and trade relations. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for more coming up on Al International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.
Trade exchange between Egypt and Japan witnessed a significant growth of about 22% during 2020. The head of the General Federation of Chambers of Commerce and chairman of the Egyptian-Japanese Business Council, Ibrahim Al-Arabi, said that this progress came despite the economic impact of the corona pandemic on the performance of the global economy during the past year. He added that the total trade exchange between Egypt and Japan amounted to $1.3 billion in 2020. The Egyptian exports on the Japanese market increased by about 117%, while the volume of Egyptian imports from Japan increased by 5% during the past year compared to 2019. This came in a speech delivered during the roundtable meeting in the Egyptian-Japanese Business Council, with the participation of the Japanese ambassador to Egypt, Masaki Inoue, and in presence of the head of the Industrial Modernization Center and the head of the promotion sector at the Investment Authority, officials of the Japan Bank for International Cooperation and the Japan International Cooperation. Joint cooperation opportunities that the center provides to the Japanese partners represented the investment incentives and benefits and the measures taken by the Egyptian government to encourage and develop local and international investments within the framework of the economic reform plan. The Japan Bank of International Cooperation called on the Egyptian banks and the financial institutions to cooperate in implementing joint economic projects that the Japanese Foreign Trade Authority presented to the Egyptian private companies, confirming the positive progress in the investment and business environment in Egypt and given a positive Japanese assessment of the progress and growth the Egyptian economy is witnessing.